Welcome to Scoop and Scale, where we dish up the science and weigh facts about mostly equine nutrition. I'm Michelle Anderson. I spent 2 decades working in equine media, and I currently create content and help veterinarians and businesses connect with horse owners through my consulting business, Cadence Marketing and Media. I'm a trail rider, dressage rider, and an at-home horse keeper.
And I'm equine nutrition consultant, Dr. Clair of Clarity Equine Nutrition. I develop diet plans for horses ranging from metabolic seniors to Olympic athletes. I also consult for equine nutrition companies. I'm a scientist, dressage rider, and a pony club mom.
Clair and I collaborated for years when I was the editor of an equine publication, and she was one of our regular contributors. We'd finish work, but we always had more to talk about. New products, new research, and our own horses. This podcast is an extension of those conversations. It's for anyone who wants to make better choices when it comes to feeding and caring for their own horses.
And before we get started, a quick disclaimer. The information in this podcast is general and not meant to replace the individualized advice of your own qualified equine nutritionist or veterinarian. While I have a PhD in nutrition, I'm not a veterinarian and can't give medical advice.
With that, thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the following episode. Who doesn't love a horse with a shiny coat, a full mane, and a long, thick tail? It's no surprise then that how do I make my horse's coat shiny and how do I get my horse's tail to grow faster are two of the most common horse-related questions people search for online. Clair, as an equine nutritionist, are these questions that you hear a lot?
Yes and no. I mean, I can't say I get a huge number of people coming to me specifically because they want a shinier coat, but certainly if I spend any time in numerous Facebook groups or whatever, it's a question that comes up over and over again in Facebook groups and other social media platforms and online, forums and what have you. And certainly I definitely have people who come to me, they're often coming to me because they have greater health concerns, but part of the overall health sort of picture that's making them think there's something not quite right with their horse is the fact that their horse has a dull coat or it's a little rough or they're losing mane or tail. But generally, the people I work with have greater concerns. But I know just from my time in the internet forums and stuff that it's a very common question and may not be a big enough question to get people to reach out to a professional, but it's something that really bothers a lot of horse owners.
Yeah, I think it's one that gets talked a lot about in the barn aisle. If you're in a barn with other people in a boarding barn or a training barn where we're standing around and we're grooming our horses and tacking and everyone wants their horse to be beautiful.
That is true. I mean, I'm very lucky. Like my daughter's pony is ridiculously shiny and we get frequent comments from people about how shiny he is. So it may not be even comments about my horse isn't that shiny, but certainly the shiny horse in the barn gets comments, right? So everybody would like to be the owner of the shiny horse. So yeah, it's definitely something that people give a lot of thought to.
So my horse is also shiny because she gets a Dr. Clair approved diet. And I think it's harder. We both have chestnuts and the chestnut coats, I think they can be a little tricky to get that really, really good shine on, especially when you get some sun bleaching. But for my mare, she doesn't have a lot of tail. My other horses do. And so, it's something like I like grooming my horses, but I have other things to do too. So I'm not one who spends lots and lots of time. I fuss with their feet a lot because I'm really into the health of their feet. But, some of them like being groomed more than others. She does like being groomed. But so on the tails, there's that whole thing. Do you brush the tail or do you not brush the tail? If you brush it, are you just going to break hairs? And I recently was in the barn. I wasn't in the best mood while I was there. I should have been in a better mood because I was at the barn. But I was trying to make her tail look presentable, and I got a little aggressive in my brushing of her tail. And one of my barn mates, who I've known for 20 years almost, and she's so sweet and kind, and she rarely offers advice, but when she does, you should listen because she'll be very quietly offer it. And as she walked by, she said, "Did you know that it takes a year for the hair to grow back when you pull it out when you're brushing?" And I went, And then later I had to go back and tell her, I really did appreciate you telling me that. That was a really good reminder.
Yeah, I really love, I do love a nice tail, and I'm pretty picky about the mane. I just went through, actually, the last 12 months, I've had sort of my own mane and tail horror story. So our pony spent Christmas of 2022 with our dressage trainer. And the day we went to pick him up, we walk in the stall and his tail is 12 inches shorter than it was when we took him to the trainers, and it was wet. And evidently he had put it through the railings into the stall next door, and literally the horse next door had eaten the bottom of his tail off, and it was literally still wet. So if maybe we'd arrived 10 minutes earlier, maybe it would have been saved. And, we had a big rated show to go to about 2 weeks later, and I was like, no, it looks terrible. And it was all like, it was awful. So I will admit I did go get a fake tail. I found a fake tail local consignment store for like $50, which is not a lot of money for fake tails. Anybody out there who does the fake tail thing, they can be really expensive. And so then we made it very presentable because it was really pretty awful. And then this past summer, our barn is mare motels. And so we have pipe pens, and the horse next door to him gets alfalfa and he doesn't get any alfalfa. And he loves alfalfa. And so he kept putting his head through the railings to eat the alfalfa, and he wore out a big, probably 6 to 9 inch strip of his mane down to like no mane. I tried everything. I homemade mane bags. I put mane bags in his mane. I tried everything. Nothing was working. He now lives with very smart white trellis tied to the pipe pen so he can't put his mane through. And this was prior to our region's USDF finals, dressage finals that he'd qualified for. So I need to be able to braid him. And I was just like, I love turnout. Turnout's really I really pride myself in turning my horses out extremely well. And I was just dying inside about this mane. And for those of you that are struggling with this kind of thing, I actually went to a local hobby store, and there's a brand of yarn called skein tones. So when you buy yarn, right, you buy it in a skein. That's what it's called. And I just thought this was so clever because it's called skein tones, and they're all flesh tones. And so I took a piece of his mane that I had pulled from the thicker section with me, and I color matched it to almost precisely his mane color. And then I braided in a great big lump I took probably 9 pieces of yarn and braided it into my braid. I had like 2 inches of hair to play with, and I braided the yarn in. And so he ended up with braids that were the same fatness as the rest of his neck for regionals. But yeah, it was a lot of work. And so I really get it when people want their horses' manes and tails to grow out quickly, because it takes a really long time. So that was wise advice your friend gave you.
Yes. Yes. And so she said that, it takes a year for a hair to grow back. And that kind of jingles in the back of my mind that at some point I have read or edited an article about a study about hair growth in horses. And so I had to do some digging to remember exactly. But so there is a study that was done in Austria, and they found that a horse's tail, a domestic bred horse, their tail grows about a centimeter every 13 days. And so doing the math, because I'm getting to inches instead of centimeters, so it's about 11 inches a year, which it's not a whole lot. And so my barn mate, she was actually more gracious, saying that it would take a year. It probably takes closer to 2 years for that hair to grow back.
That sounds about right. So, I mean, like when I think about our horses have like what we call bridle paths cut, right? So that there's a nice kind of clipped area where the halter goes behind their ears. And, when I think back to I tend to cut it before we go to shows, right? And so it's surprising how much it's grown month to month. If we show every other month, how much it's grown in between. And that sounds about right.
So some of our listeners might wonder why we're talking about this topic during the winter months. And so if you're listening, you might not be listening during the winter, but we are recording this and releasing it initially during the winter months. Why is the winter a good time to think about your horse's coat and mane and tail quality and their nutrition?
Yeah, because I mean, your point that it takes almost a year to grow out, right? And oftentimes, people start showing in the colder climates, maybe late April, May, and that's when they kind of look at it and go, "Oh, I wish my horse had a shiny coat." Or, the horse starts shedding out and, "Oh, I wish my horse had a shiny coat coming in." And, if you want that to be the case, if you want the summer coat to come in beautifully colored and lots of shine on it and have healthy manes and tails and things for show season, you actually have to put that nutrition in place several months ahead of time and not at the last minute as that new coat is coming in.
So, Claire, you live in what I like to think of as the upside down. So you're in Arizona, and you're showing horses now while we're in our single digits. But even being in the single digits, because winter came late. It came well after the solstice, after the holiday season. So even though it's 7 degrees, our horses, because their coat and their winter coat and their summer coat is controlled by the exposure to light and the length of day. And so our horses now think spring's coming, and they've started shedding just a little bit. And so now is the time that they're starting to put on that new coat and grow those new hair that are going to be their coat
I
this
saw
summer.
a map, actually. I think it came across one of my social media feeds where somebody had, in the northern states, had put like an arrow saying, we gain 60 minutes of daylight this month. It was for the month of January, but, we don't feel that so much down here because we're so much further south. We don't get that big fluctuation, whereas you don't get dark until, I'm guessing, probably like 10 o'clock at night in the summer, around June, July time.
Yeah.
We're still getting dark at sort of 8:39. Like we don't have quite that big light change that you guys do.
The big swing, yeah.
So I could see your horses are probably already tapping into that extra daylight that's kind of coming in.
Yeah. No, they're thinking spring's on the way, but they need to press pause because it's really cold out.
My fond memories of my dad always used to say growing up, be like December 22nd, one day after the solstice, and he'd be like, "Oh, practically summer! It's right around the corner."
Right? I like it. He's an optimist. I like it.
Yes.
So, as they're putting on the new hairs, what is the hair made out of, and how is nutrition supporting that growth?
Yeah, so hair is predominantly protein, right? It's keratin. And then, there's kind of a cuticle on the outside, and that cuticle is kind of coated in a fatty substance. So there's a little bit of fat involved there as well. But yes, predominantly it is keratin, and which is protein. So it's very important that the horses have adequate protein in their diets, and that protein is good enough quality. And I think we've alluded to protein quality in some of our other episodes, but really, I know protein is made up of amino acids. And amino acids, there are some that have to be in the diet because the horse cannot make them. We call those essential amino acids. And then there are others, non-essential amino acids, that the horse could actually make itself. It could take a bit of a carbohydrate chain and a bit of another amino acid and kind of stick it together and make whatever one it is it needs. So it's really important we judge protein quality. The higher the proportion of essential amino acids in a protein, the better quality that protein is. So, the problem is that rarely do I see diets that are protein deficient. We generally have adequate levels of crude protein in the diet, but I think sometimes we do run into issues where perhaps the quality of the protein, the level of the essential amino acids in the diet isn't quite great enough to meet those needs. And that's when you can start to see issues in hair coat quality and other issues too, right? It'll show up in other places. But, I think of like coat and skin and hooves as being sort of a good barometer of overall amino acid status in the horse. And, there are some more dramatic ones like poor top line development and stuff. But I think they sometimes take perhaps a little longer to show up or show up differently in different horses. So, protein is the big one. And then, a little bit of fat in the diet is important as well because you need those fatty acids to coat that cuticle and make it smooth. And that really then kind of ties into the shine, right? And I don't know, when I was growing up, there always used to be these like shampoo commercials on television where they would like zoom in on a hair follicle, a hair, and it would all be all sort of jagged and kind of rough looking, right? And then they would say, oh, if you use this shampoo, and then they'd show it again, and all those jaggedy kind of cells were all flat. And if they're flat, they reflect light better. Right. So that's one of the ways that it makes hair shinier. And, the things with those shampoos is they're putting a topical coating on the hair. So it's sort of a fake way of doing it. Right. What would be better would be if you did it through nutrition and kind of from the inside out. And so that's what those fatty acids are doing is they're coating that hair and making all those, kind of cuticles lay flat so they then reflect the light better. So that's why having some fat in the diet can really help with improving the shine of the coat.
And correct me if I'm wrong on this, but so the hair and also the hoof just like our nails, our fingernails and our toenails and our hair are made out of keratin. And that's not
Right.
alive, right? Like at that point, it's no longer living tissue.
Right. Yeah. I mean, some of it, I mean, obviously in the hooves, there's some living tissue in there,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Well,
that
yeah.
external, just to clarify for people, the external hoof wall we think of as being at that point is not live in the same way.
Yeah. It's more like your fingernail. So since you mentioned amino acids, let's go ahead and talk about them really quickly. Are there any specific amino acids that are going to help the hair coats that people should be looking for in their horses' diets?
Yeah, I don't know of specific ones that are, more predominant in hair coat, the way, for example, we know that like leucine is really important for muscle, right? That's a very predominant amino acid in muscle. I have to admit, I'm not so up on like, the actual amino acids, proportions of different amino acids in hair. But when I think about essential amino acids, I'm really thinking about lysine, methionine, threonine, right? Those are the three that really come to mind. And certainly when we think about hooves, we think methionine because it's a sulfur. That we do know that particular amino acid, the methionine is important. But for hair coat and mane and tail, I'm not actually quite so sure. But certainly those are the three that I'd be looking to make sure that I'm feeding a feed that's like guaranteeing the levels of lysine, methionine, and threonine on the tag. That's really important. I would caution people against grabbing that amino acid supplement because it is important that the amino acid profile of the diet is balanced and that you're not just sort of feeding a ton of one in exclusively and then not feeding some of the others. So you have to be a little bit careful about sort of individual amino acid supplementation or some of these supplements that only have 2 or 3 in them. Like I would much rather support the hair coat by using something that's giving you a broad spectrum of all the amino acids and is guaranteeing the levels of lysine, methionine, and threonine. I think that's probably a better way to do it.
So I think instinctually we know that a nice hair coat is probably going to represent a healthy animal. The healthier the horse, the fat, shiny, happy, healthy horse that comes to mind, the grass pasture, shiny horse. But when can a dull coat indicate that there are some health issues going on and that maybe we should talk to our veterinarian? Like, can you be feeding them everything they need? Can they be getting those amino acids and the other nutrients that we're going to talk about here in a bit and still not have a shiny coat?
Yes, I think so. And there are 2 things that kind of spring to mind for me in that regard. One would be internal parasites, and so horses that have parasite burdens tend to have poorer coat quality. Sometimes the coat is longer. Sometimes they have kind of guard hairs and the like, more guard hairs. It's a coarser feel to it. But the other one that comes to mind too is I think that sometimes I notice that the horses that have Cushing's and PPID, sometimes they will also have, rougher, coarser coats. So if you have an older senior horse that's, got PPID and a rough, coarse coat, it's got a rough, coarse coat, you might want to, talk to your vet about whether or not you should be, considering PPID. And I think in our episode where we talked about PPID, we actually discussed that and parasites linked together because we know that horses that have Cushing's or PPID, their immune systems don't work as well. And there's been some research showing that those horses tend to be the horses with the higher parasite burden on a farm and maybe need a more rigorous, very specific deworming protocol that your vet may need to be involved with. So sometimes those things go kind of hand in hand. But yes, I do think if you're doing everything right and the horse has still got kind of a dull coat and is, especially if it's kind of coarse feeling, then I definitely be checking with my vet about that. And then there are the dull, coarse coat. I also see that sometimes with some mineral deficiencies. Copper in particular will give like almost like a fish hook ending to the hair. So like when you look at the hair, and I see this on, you mentioned that we have chestnuts. I mean, you've probably noticed, you'll see those chestnuts that instead of being red, they're slightly yellow. And, when you look at the coat, and you see that on bays too, bays that have gone slightly yellow, and you look at the hair coat, and if you take a hair, you'll notice it's got this little like flick on the end of it. It's almost like a little like fish hook. And that can actually be tied to trace mineral status. So it's not so much of a health issue as it is, a nutritional status, which obviously can become a health issue. But yeah, so that's what I think of when I see those.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the minerals. So you mentioned copper. I think that's a big one, making sure that they have enough copper. Why is copper the big one? And then what are the other minerals that we want to make sure our horses are getting the right amounts of?
Yeah, copper and zinc are both kind of tied to melanin production. And melanin is what makes skin and coat darker in color, right? So horses that, have darker skin colors have more melanin in their hair coat than horses that are lighter colors, right? So and there's obviously their coat color is genetically determined for them, but that's the amount of melanin that's in the hair will have an impact on that. And zinc and copper are both linked to melanin production. So you may be genetically supposed to be, a black horse, but if you aren't getting enough copper and zinc to be able to make the melanin to make the black pigmentation, then you may not be as dark as you should be. And also then there's the issue of, those minerals also play into the protection of the melanin and preventing it from becoming oxidized by sunlight. So, horses that don't have enough copper and zinc in their diet can bleach out in the sun because they're not able to withstand the oxidative damage of UV light. So yeah, those two minerals are very important to coat color.
So we've touched on protein and amino acids and minerals. What about vitamins? What vitamins are playing a role in quality hair coat and mane and tail growth?
Again, it's two come to mind, right? Biotin, which is a water-soluble
and when we hear biotin, we always think hooves.
Yeah.
And we are going to do a hoof supplement episode in the future, but this is like one of those that's really linked between the hair and the hoof.
Yeah, biotin plays a role in kind of how strong the hair is. So that can play a role. And, technically, horses do make their own biotin. Horses make their own B vitamins. Well, I should correct myself. They don't make their own B vitamins. The bacteria in the hindgut make the B vitamins. And then there's this symbiotic relationship between the bacteria in the hindgut. And so these bacteria are creating all these B vitamins, and then they get absorbed by the horse. And so there's really, we don't really see a lot of B vitamin deficiencies in horses for that reason. But it is interesting because, and I'm sort of getting into the hoof part here, but we do know that some horses do see improved hoof quality when fed biotin, even though there's no nutritional deficiency in biotin. So it suggests that maybe, their diet, that there could be, they would benefit from a higher level of biotin. Maybe their self-producing biotin is not optimal. And so, yes, it can be, if you're struggling with, I really struggle with in the summer here, it gets so dry and, the hair will just snap. I mean,
that's here too, because we're desert, we're cold and you're hot, but we're desert too. And the dry air is so hard on their coats.
It really is. And so, biotin may help with that. I have to say, I didn't have a lot of luck with it. I think no biotin in the world is going to help you if you're standing in the corner of the pasture by the no-climb fence all day, swishing your tail and hitting the no-climb fence with your tail when it's 110 degrees out and your tail's really dry because you just rolled in the dirt. Yeah. The biotin didn't help me in that instance, but it can help some horses. So it's worth trying. And then the other vitamin that really comes to mind for coat is vitamin E, which I don't think people think about very much, but it just seems like, and it may be somewhat anecdotal that, horses that have good vitamin E status seem to be kind of shiny and have shiny coats. Certainly, I haven't seen a lot of research in horses on vitamin E and hair quality.
We see a lot of it on muscles and vitamin E and muscle. Yeah.
Yes. And we know that a lot of horses out there are vitamin E deficient and their owners don't realize that they are. And I think we have an episode actually on that.
We do. Episode 2, we talked about vitamin E because it's a hot topic because there's some genetic research about how horses use vitamin E.
Yeah.
And also we know that it comes from pasture grass and a lot of our horses don't have year-round access to pasture grass.
Especially at this time of year, right? Where nearly all the horses have been in the US at this point have been on hay for several months, even if they're normally on good quality pasture. And they might be out at pasture now, but the quality is just not there anymore. And they're really being, supplemented with hay. And so those horses' vitamin E status is dwindling, right as their summer coats are starting to, think about coming in. So, I do think that's one of the reasons why we see shiny horses in the spring on pasture, right? It's that pasture as the grass flush comes in the spring. It's got a really abundant amount of vitamin E in it. It's also higher in protein, good quality protein too. So it makes sense that, we get these fat, shiny horses with dapples and what have you. In the spring, it's, all that sort of protein and vitamin E that's there. There's some interesting research actually in people, though, that I've found, where there was a study where they looked at people with alopecia, so were struggling with hair loss, and they actually fed them a mix, like vitamin E supplement. Half the group, they gave them this vitamin E supplement, half of them they didn't, and they looked at the number of hairs growing in a square inch on their heads, I think at like 0, 4, and 8 months. And the people that were given the vitamin E supplement had, I want to say it was 34% more hairs growing in that square inch than the people that were not supplemented. And actually the people that were not supplemented, the amount of hair had gone down. I think it was like negative 0.1%. So obviously that's human research. Does it apply to horses? Who knows? But it is just kind of an interesting observation that, and the researchers' hypothesis as to why that is that the vitamin E, we know it's an antioxidant, right? That's kind of what vitamin E is and its role in the body, and that it was acting as an antioxidant at the hair follicle and helping to kind of protect the hair as it was growing in and preventing all the sort of mechanisms of the follicle from suffering from oxidative damage. So I thought that was really interesting. And so maybe if you have a horse that's, thin mane, thin tail, not growing great, mane and tail, it's worth considering their vitamin E status. As you know, I'm a big test them every year believer anyway.
Yeah, blood test. Yeah.
Yeah, blood test. I mean, if you're struggling with mane and tail growth or thinning mane and tail, it could be worth using that as a potential indicator and definitely getting their vitamin E levels tested.
Yeah. And I think I mentioned genetics with how horses use vitamin E for their muscles, and that just makes me think of genetics in general. So it's not completely connected, but I'm in a little tangent here. Is like I have very fine hair. It doesn't matter how much vitamin E you give me, my hair strands are always going to be a little bit finer. And there are certain colors or genetics. I started my career working for the Appaloosa Horse Club, and there are definitely some Appaloosa genes where you see the Appaloosas that have the very short tails or their manes are come out, and there's lots of theories on why that happens. But my understanding is it really is a genetic component. It doesn't matter. I mean, you do the best you can with what you have, and you feed what you have the best you can, and you groom the best that you can. But at the end of the day, that Roan Appaloosa mare is probably going to just have a short tail because she has a short tail. So
no, that's so true. And I think that's a really important point to make, is that I can help people put together great diets that should promote hair growth and healthy, shiny coats. But at the end of the day, I'm just helping your horse's genetics be the best genetic, fully express its best genetics. But if it's got less than stellar coat and mane genetics as far as length or whatever, I can't do anything about that.
So back to the nutrients that go into all this. So we talked about vitamins, the vitamin E. What about fat? Because we all know, like, you give them fat, they get shiny.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I briefly mentioned it before, right? That's that coating that goes on the outside of the hair, and it kind of sticks all the follicles down and coats them and makes them smooth, and that's what makes it shiny, because the hair can reflect off of the coat and be shiny, and it's not all broken up by rough-looking cuticle cells that are all jaggedy or whatever. So yeah, certainly adding some fat to the diet can certainly help with that. And yeah, so and again, it depends on what you already have in your diet. If you might be feeding a performance feed that already has a high fat percentage in it, and then you're probably fine on that regard. I wouldn't necessarily be adding extra fat to that diet just because the hair coat should be shiny if you're feeding those kinds of feeds.
So if you are recommending adding fat to a diet, what are those sources that you would recommend to address hair coat? If everything else is the best it can be, and you need to add a fat supplement.
I mean, the old traditional, right, was just to grab a jug of corn oil and just go glug glug, right? And that's not my favorite.
No. So, and you should say why that's not your favorite, because I was so that's when I was a kid. You go to Costco, you get the big thing of corn oil, and it made a mess. But that's not why we don't like it. It's not because of the mess it made, although it did make a mess.
It did make a mess. You're right. And it stains concrete on the floor in your tack room. It's not easy to get out. No, I mean, at the end of the day, you just need something with fat in it. And so it is a perfectly valid fat source. It's not that it won't make your hair shiny. It will. It's just the type of fat that it is. So if I'm going to add a fat source to a diet to make a hair coat shiny, I'd also like it to do some other things that might be beneficial as well. And when I think about that, I'm thinking more about like the omega-3 fatty acids. And corn oil is predominantly all omega-6 fatty acid, is this long chain fatty acid, polyunsaturated fatty acid. And so it's not my favorite. So I would be doing things like flax, ground stabilized flax oil, camelina oil, fish oil, all those really good omega-3 sources would be my preference, because they help support a healthy inflammatory response throughout the horse's body. So beyond giving you fat to make a shiny coat, you're also potentially going to support your horse's joints and digestive health, and everywhere else in the horse's body where there could potentially be an inflammatory response that's going a little awry. Hopefully that omega-3 will help kind of keep that in a more normal range. So that's why I like, if I'm going to add a fat source, my preference would be for an omega-3 heavy fat source.
So it sounds like we need to have all of these parts of their nutrition in balance to optimize the coat. Like, it's not just one thing. It's not just grabbing that high fat supplement and throwing it at the horse. And it's not just grabbing another supplement that's an amino acid supplement, or just grabbing the vitamin E. It's really about balancing them and making sure the horse has all of those things.
And I'm groaning at myself that I'm about to say this, but
I can't wait. What is it? What is it?
It's not salt. It's because everybody knows that's my other favorite thing. No, but in reality, like, for example, if you're feeding something like a ration balancer properly, right, it's going to give you all these pieces except perhaps the omega-3, right? So it's going to give you that quality protein. It's going to give you the vitamin E, although you should still check your vitamin E level, because as we said, individual horses have different metabolisms of vitamin E. It's going to have all the zinc. It's going to have all the copper, right? So yet again,
the ration balancer.
We kind of fall back on that, our friend, the ration balancer, or just if you're feeding a higher amount of a performance feed, that'll do the job too. It should be meeting all your horses needs in such a way that should also take care of their coat. So, but what I tend to see is I see people feeding hay-based diets, and a pound of a senior feed that should be fed at way over 6 pounds per day, and they're not feeding that properly. And so the horse's diet is deficient in copper and zinc and vitamin E, and it doesn't really have adequate fat source. And so the coat starts to, decline. And so then they reach for some sort of omega coat supplement, and they add that, and, and then something else goes wrong. So they add that. And the reality is, if the commercial feed was just being fed properly, all those coat supplements and things that people are reaching for just wouldn't be needed, because it would all be addressed by the properly fed commercial feed. So that's kind of my soapbox moment.
Yeah. And so the ration balancers, we did just post an episode about ration balancers, both things that we both really like for our horses. Right. Me, because I have a bunch of different kinds of horses that I feed, and it just simplifies my life. But that's episode 13. You mentioned senior feed. We also talked about senior feed. That's episode 14. So if anyone wants more information on those things, you can listen to those episodes. We have lots of reference episodes now, so that we don't have to go down rabbit holes and
exactly
in one episode. It's what keeps our episodes from being 2 hours long.
Exactly.
Go listen to vitamin E. Really interesting. Ration balancers, we love them. Senior feeds, they're not just for senior horses. So,
exactly.
So we're balancing all of those things. But so at the end of the day, what's more important in having a shiny coat and good hair growth? Is it the nutrition, or is it grooming and grooming products?
I'm going to say I love grooming. So unlike you, and you're obsessed with the feet, I do love to groom. It's a bit of a standing joke with some of my friends that, I can easily groom for 30 to 45 minutes. I love it. And I have all kinds of silly brushes that I use. And anyway, yes, first of all, I would say, you have to have a good diet. Then you actually do have to groom your horse, which, I kind of hate to say it, but that's just, you cannot shampoo in the kind of shine you can put on a horse by grooming. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm a bit of a turnout queen, and you can tell horses that were not groomed properly and then were just washed the day before the show and don't ever really see a good groom. Their coats are never as good as the horses that have been groomed regularly. So that getting in there with that deep curry combing and really stirring up all the grease and what have you, and getting that out of the coat, and using, depending on your horse, the different types of brushes and things to really pull that through the coat. That also is going to help with the shine, because you're moving all that oil through the coat from their skin and covering each of the hairs with the oil that's naturally occurring in their skin and coat. And so that's part of what really helps with the shine. I grew up doing something that's called strapping. So strapping is where we actually have strapping pads. So they're actually lambswool filled leather pads that you wear, but you can actually make what we call a hay whisk out of hay.
This is so British.
I know, I'm having my British moment. I know. So, and you can I love teaching, like teach the kids at Pony Club how to make hay whisks at camp and stuff for every year, because they're always like, what is this? And you kind of make this long rope of hay and then wind it all in and out and make a big wadding thing. And you basically, you bang the horse's large muscle groups, right? So the glutes on their hind end, and you do it in a rhythm, and it's actually a great way of helping horses stay conditioned when they're out of work, because you're making them contract their muscles and relax their muscles, but it gets the blood flowing. And grooming does that too, right? It kind of stimulates, you're like doing these big sweeping circular motions with your curry comb. You're really kind of getting the blood flowing in their skin and in their muscles. And so again, it's bringing all that nutrition to the hair. You don't get that with you just run a hose and some shampoo over them. So yes, it starts with a good diet and then moves to a solid grooming routine. And then, you put your finishing touches on by shampooing them the day before the show kind of thing. That's your final touch, but don't rely on your shampooing, which I know a lot of people do. And it's certainly, good grooming. It's a workout. It's a workout, but I love it.
Well, since you mentioned shampoo and grooming products are part of this, I know there's a tendency sometimes to just grab like whatever shampoo you had in the shower that you didn't like, the smell
right?
of, or someone in your household, it wasn't their thing, or you had a guest and they left their ball of shampoo and it turns into horse shampoo.
Right.
What might be a reason not to use that, and why might that be not great for the shine on a horse's coat?
Yeah, so it's interesting, but we don't often think about the pH of the horse's skin, and horses and humans don't have the same skin pH. So horse's skin is actually fairly neutral, right? It runs in the sort of 7 to 7.4 pH. Adult human skin is way more acidic. It runs kind of more 5.4. And you might think, well, that's only 2 pH points lower, but you have to remember it's a logarithmic scale. So that's actually a huge difference. Interestingly enough, like baby products are a little more neutral. So baby skin is like 6.34, I think, to like 7.5. So, I think if I was tempted to reach for a human product to use on my horse, I'd probably be looking more at like products made for babies than adult humans, assuming that, the company's done their research and they're actually at a baby approved pH. And again, hopefully the people making horse shampoo understand that horse's skin is a different pH and are actually making it, so I would be looking for products that specifically state that they are made with the equine pH in mind. That would maybe give me some confidence that they've actually thought about that a little bit. And I don't see that very commonly on packaging, but that's something that I would be looking for.
And then there is talk, especially, so I have a black horse under my care, and she is like the shiny blue-black, very, very, very pretty black horse. And there is talk with black horses that you can use like paprika to bring out their coat color. Is that something that you recommend to your clients, or you've had clients ask you about if they have a dark or a black horse?
I see I've had a few clients kind of come across a desk that are feeding those kinds of products. And my understanding is that the reason why paprika gets included in products for black bay type horses is that paprika has quite a lot of naturally occurring copper in it. Now, the amount of copper in paprika, naturally high, it's not high in the context of the equine requirement, right? It's not, I think you'd have to feed an awful lot of paprika to meet the horse's copper requirement, but that's my understanding as to if it's working to do that. I think that's the mechanism by which it's doing it. I don't recommend paprika products, and that's because a lot of my clients compete. And right now, like paprika contains a substance called capsaicin, and capsaicin is a prohibited substance under USEF rules. So I don't recommend paprika products to my clients for that reason. And I think it's a good reminder that, if you're going to grab some of these kind of coat products a little bit on the fringe and they're using some novel ingredients and what have you, just to be a little bit careful sometimes, because there might be things that are not approved by your governing body. So I think it's always important for people, when you're reaching really for any kind of supplement, but especially in these sorts of areas, to check with your governing body and to make sure that the ingredients in the products you're using are allowed. And rules change all the time, right? So,
all the time. And at the end of the day, as the competitor, if that's what you're doing, and absolutely understand that not everyone listening is someone who competes with their horses. But if you are competing with your horses, you are the one responsible. If you're signing the entry, it's your horse. You're the one responsible. And so something to keep in mind. So just because Claire says paprika is not an approved substance for USEF right now doesn't mean that that's true. It is true right now, but it could change. And we just don't know.
USEF don't oversee large areas of our horse sports, right? So, I mean, if you're a reiner or a cutter or barrel racing, I mean, I'm not so up on those rules, so maybe it's fine, right? So that's why it's just very important that, you are familiar with what the rules are for your discipline, and that you're governing, you check in with your governing body about, what you can and can't put in your horse's diet.
Yeah. And that's just a little squirrel off that is that, like, I was going to endurance rides and I was surprised to learn that for endurance, you can't use MSM, but you can.
Exactly. So, yeah. It's crazy, right? I mean, you can't use MSM and for endurance horses, and but totally fine for us in the dressage world. So it's you just have to know your own sport and what your governing body is. Yeah, because it would be really unfortunate to have a super shiny horse and then take it to the
most beautifully turned out horse at the horse show,
and then get eliminated because you got your shine thanks to paprika that you're not allowed to have.
Yes. So, well, Claire, that is all the time we have today to talk about manes, tails, and coats. We hope that those who have listened have gotten something out of it and learned something, have a little bit better understanding of how nutrition can help make your horses shiny and help grow that mane and tail out.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, I love seeing shiny horses, and there's just something really satisfying, right, about going out to the barn and having, being met by a lovely shiny horse. I think it does it gives us that confidence that we're doing things right for their health, right? I think you're right. You touched on it earlier when you said, people think that shiny horses are healthy horses, and it's true, right? They generally are healthy. And so I think, it just kind of gives us that satisfaction and peace of mind that we're doing something right, because let's be honest, we as equestrians are often beating ourselves up about all the things we're doing wrong. So
yeah. And when I was a kid, there was an older cowboy that we knew, and he always said, I don't hang my head when I take that horse out of the trailer. And so, and that was his way of saying that he wanted to have the prettiest, shiniest horse when he got it out of the horse trailer. And I think we all feel that way, that we want our horses to be beautiful and healthy. So with that, for our listeners, if you would like to be part of our conversations in the future, please send your suggestions for topics and your equine nutrition questions to info@scoopandscale.com. That's info@scoop and is spelled out and scale.com. And you can also find Claire at clarityequine.com.
Yeah, and please make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts and share on your social media platforms. We're always very grateful for you to spread the word and with your friends, and it means a lot to us.
For the Scoop and Scale podcast, I'm Michelle Anderson.
And I'm Dr. Claire Tunis.
Thanks for riding along with us.